The relationship between Lady Macbeth and Macbeth is both fascinating and tragic. Over the course of this relatively short play, they move from being a loving couple who seem united to virtual strangers who are really isolated in their own versions of hell that they've created. The tragedy and anguish and horror they put on themselves is unbelievable. Lady Macbeth desires that her husband should be king and abuses his love for her in order to make him murder King Duncan, while Macbeth allows his desire to please his wife and prove himself a man in her eyes cloud his judgment and force him to act against his better nature. Evil and temptation insert itself into the little cracks of their relationship, and character flaws which would be insignificant in the normal course of events take on a really dreadful significance. Both get their wish, but at a really terrible price. Darkness and evil consume them as individuals and tear them apart as a couple. Hello and welcome back to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. I really hope you're ready to explore this couple and the foul play they create across this tragic play. So, at the start of this play, it's really clear to us that the Macbeths share this really intense, rather fiery, passionate relationship. Macbeth's really keen to share with her his great news that he's encountered the witches, got a promotion, and he refers to his wife in the superlative, my dearest partner in greatness. He's keen for her to share in the dues of rejoicing and does not want her to remain ignorant of what greatness is promised. So there's two things that kind of run side by side here. To a Jacobean audience, it's quite a strange marriage because they're dear, but there's an equal partnership going on. He's sharing everything he has. He's allowing himself to confide fully in her. It's clear she's his soulmate and confidant. And yet we know, not just in the lens that a Jacobean audience would see it, but also from the plot as it unfolds, that isn't going to last for long. From the moment that Macbeth informs his wife of his promotion and she receives that letter, their relationship is already in a state of decline. Now, Lady Macbeth is pretty ambitious on behalf of her husband, and she's really adamant that he needs to be king, but she fears he's too full of the milk of human kindness. Now, I think it's important, I highly recommend my video on manipulation on this exact piece of evidence. You'll get more detail there, but the use of the noun milk is really significant. It's associated largely with women, not men, and in a sense, this is the first offering we get of her emasculating him. She worries that he's not going to act swiftly and decisively, and she worries that his ambition is not matched by the illness that she sees should attend on it as she sees it. It's a really interesting point, and one that sort of suggests there's already a fracture in the couple's unity. Now, you can see in the bottom left of my screen, I have a bloodied dagger, and that's for two purposes. She seems to know her husband well, or she claims she does, yet I think it's important to say our first encounter with Macbeth is that he's a ferocious warrior. He's killed a man in a really intensely violent way. He's literally hacked a man open. He's unseamed him from the nave to the chops. I find it really interesting that publicly he's been declared as brave Macbeth, yet she secretly, or at least openly, shares with the audience her concerns that he is not going to be man enough to murder. So I'm interested, is she aware of this side of her husband's nature? I mean, fair play, he doesn't write about it in the letter, but it would seem so odd that this weakness plays a role in the undoing of their relationship. She's really determined to unleash Macbeth's violence and remove any obstacle that gets in the way of them and what they call the golden round or the crown. But she doesn't seem to realise that once that's unleashed, that isn't a force you can just try and control. It will destroy both of them. Now, at this stage in the relationship, it seems to me that Lady Macbeth has the upper hand. There's an aspect of her husband's character that she knows well, and that is his desire to appear worthy of her love. She manipulates him by playing on his sense of manliness. Macbeth has been thinking things over, and when they meet This is when it becomes really spicy. So by Act 1, Scene 7, Macbeth has thought things over and has decided he can proceed no further in this business. I think proceed is such a useful verb for us. It signals how little he's prepared to concede on this. Yet, within that same scene, he is persuaded to do the opposite. Lady Macbeth bullies him, she goads him, she calls him a coward, she compares him to a cat that refuses to get its paws wet to get the fish it wants. That's what she means when she says the poor cat in the adage. That metaphor signalling that he's not the man he ought to be. And in response to that, he says, I do all that may become a man. Who dares do more is none. And what he means by that, they're foolish if they do more than what I'm daring to do. But you'd think that would be the end of the conversation. Surely in a Jacobean theatre, they're watching this in horror that this woman has this amount of control over this man. But actually, she rings true to what she promised she would be earlier in Act 1, Scene 5, when she said, chastise him with the valour of my tongue. She knows her words are her weapon. And she's right. She claims that she would have snatched her nursing child from her breast and dashed the brains out had I sworn to do so. And that moves Macbeth to try and prove himself even more determined than she is. He listens to this, and his honour, morality, pity, doubts and fears, all of them are put aside, so he agrees to become the man she wants him to be. Ironically, in doing this and meeting her demands, he's about to undertake a task that will definitely, irreparably damage their relationship. But it's evident Lady Macbeth is in control at this stage. And Macbeth's tentative, if we should fail in Act 1, Scene 7, shows that he's completely accepted the necessity of trying to kill Duncan and is now just concerned, questioning in his mind the practical details of how they'll pull this off. Lady Macbeth replies with quite a foolproof plan, and he's just lost in admiration of Lady Macbeth's strength, and he says that she should bring forth men, children only. Sadly though, Macbeth is in the thrall of a woman whose ambitions on his behalf are totally, wildly out of kilter with reality, and they will soon be caught up in their deeply flawed plan, which will only yield short-term success. Straight after the murder, she says of him, this emasculating continues, my hands are of your colour, but I shame to wear a heart so white. What she's saying here is, get a grip, man. I've done enough for you. It's interesting that he's then prepared by the end of Act 1 to go through with this terrible feat, and yet still it's not enough, even when he will become king because of it. Without his wife, Macbeth would not have been willing to perform the act, as he felt it was morally reprehensible, though he certainly thought about it. As we see though, without Macbeth, Lady Macbeth would have been incapable of performing that act herself. Both need the other. Yet because from this point on they're united in a kind of criminal partnership, their relationship is certainly doomed. The Macbeths work together in this gory business of killing the king. Lady Macbeth needs her husband to do the deed. Yet admitting that she could not bring herself to kill a man who reminded her of her father. When she does so, however, what she offers him in his guilt straight after this, she tries to offer him some form of solace. He's highly agitated before and after the murder. He's distressed and on the brink of collapse. You could say that when he says he's afraid to think of what he's done, she's superficially really strong for him. She's, urging him to consider it not so deeply and to return to plant the daggers on the groomsmen. He won't do it, so she does it. And she smears the blood that was on the daggers on these groomsmen to inculcate them in this. And she orders Macbeth to, let go. Get on your nightgown, lest occasion call us and show us to be watchers. She's in control. Macbeth is still dependent on his wife's strength and ability here to keep her head in, a crisis and stay calm. She's the one in charge, but that's all going to go very shortly. One of the most scary, chilling moments in this fascinating couple's relationship happens when Macduff questions the murder of Duncan. He says, "Wherefore did you so?" And at that moment, this is when he learns that Macbeth has killed the groomsmen. Lady Macbeth just passes out. Some critics see this as her way of taking the attention away from Macbeth, and others see it as like a genuine shocked reaction at what's happened. They've done this brutal, unplanned slaying of servants, and those echoes of confusion and disharmony echo into their relationship. They no longer act as one. From that point on, Lady Macbeth is no longer the initiator of events. The power balance shifts. Lady Macbeth has succeeded in one way, in that she's now persuaded her husband to remove that moral boundary that, normally would determine that he should kill enemies only. Now it's broken. She's now a broken woman who has no control over the monster she's created or unleashed. Chaos is in total freeform, as you see with the way nature is disordered in this particular moment in the play. Lady Macbeth is soon to be tormented herself as we see her failure to cope with the guilt she feels for what she is a part of. She turns into a really remorseful woman, yet he turns into a paranoid megalomaniac tyrant. Lady Macbeth and her husband spent virtually no time together after the murder. Lady Macbeth has to make appointments to see him, as we learn when she asks, "Say to the king I would attend his leisure for a few words." Having embraced that evil, in Act 3, Scene 2, when she's saying that, they seem doomed never to be together again, never to embrace each other. We never see a close connection physically on the stage after that. Both are locked in their own particular guilt and torment. Lady Macbeth, she's acknowledging this when she says, "Naught had and all spent, what our desire is got without content." That is such a sad line. What she's saying is, we got what we wanted and it didn't get us anywhere. What our desire is got without content. So you've got what you wanted, but it didn't give you the joy you thought it would. I want you to consider how negative that feels. All is spent without content. There's a kind of rhyme that's uncomfortable for us. Macbeth is acting independently of his wife. Where her guilt has made her nervous and much more passive than we've ever seen her before, it's made him tyrannical and even more paranoid. He plans to kill Banquo, but doesn't show this intent to his wife, telling her to be innocent of this knowledge, dearest Chuck. His term of affection, dearest Chuck, rings really hollow when we consider how he's basically removing her from his life and acting alone. In the banquet scene in Act 3, Scene 4, Lady Macbeth makes a final really tiny effort to defend her husband, who is really fearful of the ghost of Banquo that he sees sitting on his throne. She tries to protect him from pointing towards his own guilt, but it's obvious her efforts aren't working. Macbeth has left her behind, and they're now never really going to be summoning up the energy to answer anything to each other but in short replies. He plans more killings, saying that he's in blood step so far he can't go back. Whereas she makes no direct answer to this, but simply urges him to rest, saying he lacks the seasons of all natures, sleep. Although she advises her husband to sleep, Lady Macbeth finds absolutely no solace herself in that. She famously sleepwalks, and in Act 5 we see the extent of her suffering. The synergy between this, the idea of not being at peace with yourself and your actions and not being able to sleep, is a really common motif of guilt across Shakespeare plays and plays in general. Her guilt is really gnawing at her, and without her husband's support, she's cracking up under the strain. She says she knows what's done cannot be undone, and yet, when she says that in Act 5, Scene 1, she's tormented still by the murders she's created or helped support. She returns to her bed and is never seen alive again. There's suspicions of suicide, that she's walked off the edge of a building. There are so many different versions, but this woman does not recover. She still feels guilt. I think it's interesting that the last time we see the couple together is the banquet scene. It's a public show of unity, but it shows the disharmony and disarray. It's incredibly embarrassing for her that he cannot control his emotions, and yet the fact that the next time we hear of him talk about his wife is actually the final scene we acknowledge any union between Lady Macbeth and Macbeth is when he learns of her death, and he says in response to it, she should have died hereafter. He's so detached, he lacks any form of emotion. He's not sorrowful at all. Evil has driven this couple into their own particular version of hell and has severed the great bond they had between them. At the start of the play, they worked together to plan Duncan's murder and were determined to do this in a ruthless way. They set aside their humanity, and Shakespeare is showing that when you embrace immorality and wickedness, this is the price you pay. They destroyed their peace of mind, their relationship, their lives, and so many others, and it hurts for us to watch it.